How many of you all took the bus tour this morning? All right, great. Well, I'm Joe Stallings. I'm the Economic Development Director for the town of Garner. And if you took the bus tour this morning, you got to see firsthand some of the things that we're going to discuss about in this session here on opportunity zones. And I know some of you may not be familiar with opportunity zones, but my hope is by the time you walk out of here today, you'll have more information than you had whenever you came in, and you will see the value that they can bring to communities like Garner and all over the nation. With us today, we have two great speakers. Thomas Barker, who is a CPA with Elliott Davis. Thomas has over 5 years of tax planning and compliance experience. He focuses on the real estate industry, where he has worked with developers, investors, and owners of financial modeling, partnerships, allocations, deal structuring, and complex sales transactions. Additionally, Thomas has experience with opportunity zones, tax-free exchanges, and private equity transactions. Lee Hodge is an attorney with Ward & Smith, and Lee serves as the leader of the business practice, where he regularly advises clients on a broad range of business law matters, including the formation of new businesses and investment entities, stock purchases, sales transactions, asset purchases and sales transactions, and contract drafting and negotiation. Lee also represents clients on a wide range of variety of tax planning matters, including 1031 exchanges, reorganizations of business entities, tax planning for mergers and acquisition transactions, and tax planning for individuals. So let's welcome both Lee and Thomas with a warm round of applause, and we'll get started. And to get started, we're going to give just a few slides to kind of introduce the topic and then show you guys where the opportunity zones are here in Garner. To give you an idea about where these things came from, they started from the 2017 Tax and Jobs Act that was passed a little over a year ago. And it's really to provide an investment provide incentives to spur investment in low income areas. So we, the town of Garner, worked with Wake County, and Wake County on up into the governor's mansion to get our 2 census tracts here designated as opportunity zones. Once they were established, funds would then be able to begin to be created and starting to invest. So the 3 main benefits, which Lee and Thomas will talk about, is a temporary deferral, the step up in basis, and then the permanent exclusion of taxable income after the investment is held. And it's all centers around capital gains tax avoidance, which once again our speakers will speak about. But here, as you can see on the screen, are the 2 census tracts for our community. As you see, the entire 401 corridor and along Highway 70 to the north. These areas are the areas that you can receive the tax advantages of investing. So keep this in mind as we go through the presentation. We'll answer a few questions. We'll keep some time for questions and answers at the end. But keep this map in your mind. Like I said, if you attended the bus tour this morning, you went through the Highway 70 North census tract. So this is the type of things that we're focused on, and we're looking forward to the new investment that will be coming into our community. There you go. Just press the green button.
So I think kind of one of the first things that we discussed talking about is really who can take advantage of this program. And I think what's most exciting about opportunity zones is that really any taxpayer can take advantage. There's not a limit on the businesses participating in these zones. There's not a limit on the number of investors. There's not a limit on the amount of capital that can go into these zones. So I think that's what makes it really exciting. You've got business entities, individuals, trusts, any type of taxpayer that has the ability to leverage capital gains into these zones through qualified opportunity funds. And I think that's kind of the key when you talk about opportunity zones, is that it really has to be capital gains in nature. You can't take after-tax cash, what we would consider, your paycheck, you put it in the bank, and then you take that cash and invest it. You really have to have a capital event, whether that's selling stocks, selling real estate, selling your business. Those are all capital events that qualify, where you can take those gains and then reinvest them. Some stipulations that are involved, it can't be a related party, right? So you can't say, well, this is a great idea. I'm going to sell my business to my brother. We're going to go in together, and we're going to get quite the deal on this thing. So that's one rule. It has to be a gain from an unrelated third party. The other is there's a 180-day rule. So as soon as you trigger that capital event, you really have 180 days to reinvest those proceeds. So as you're looking at these opportunity zones and these investments, I think it's important to say, all right, do I have an event forthcoming? Have I had one in the past? And when does my 180-day window start, knowing that you've got time to get those gains rolled in? Taking advantage on the business side, I think there's just an opportunity, obviously, but there's so much opportunity from a capital standpoint. These zones have people really excited and really looking forward to investing and being a part of it. So you're seeing significant capital fundraising that's going on, maybe outside your normal, debt occurrences. And then sometimes, deals and expansions that may have been off the table are all of a sudden back on, and you're seeing people, maybe make a deal in an area that they didn't previously work because the margins weren't there, and all of a sudden, it's back on the table and things are forthcoming.
Yeah, let me ask you a question out there. Is there any minimum to the amount of capital gains that you have to invest?
No minimum. I mean, you harvest a capital gain, and let's say you've got $1 million of capital gain. In the opportunity zone deal, you're targeting your gain, and so you could invest anything from $1, and obviously nobody's going to invest $1, but to up to the $1 million and get the benefit.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is, oftentimes whenever we talk about opportunity zones, there's a real interest in the real estate side, right? We're building new apartments, we're building new industrial plants, we're building things of that nature, all of which we're seeing in our zones currently. But the other really interesting thing is investing in businesses, right? So if we have business owners here today that are doing business primarily within the zones, they too can get equity put in their company through the opportunity zones. Is that correct?
Sure, there's some opportunity zone rules, like any other tax rules, are pretty technical, and we're not here to drill down on all the technicalities, but long story short is sort of what kind of investments can you make? Essentially anything. You can invest in equipment for a business. Now there are some rules related to original use. So if you have an existing business in an opportunity zone, you can't say, well, I just bought all this equipment a year ago, and the opportunity zone wasn't around, and now I want to get some benefit. But if you buy new equipment, you could look at doing something. And so you can, obviously, it gets a lot of attention in the real estate market, and part of that's just due to the schedule with which the IRS came out with the regulations that actually gave us some rules to play with. So as Joe, as you mentioned, the opportunity zone didn't exist essentially until 1/1/2018, and we didn't really get any guidance on opportunity zones until October of 2018, and candidly, that guidance wasn't really good. And so we finally got some good guidance in April of this year in terms of what you can do, but the guidance that we got in October of 18 was purely targeted at the real estate industry because Treasury knew that was where most of the focus was. But you can invest, you can take your opportunity zone fund and buy a new operating business in the opportunity zone, whether you form a new business or it's new to you, you buy somebody else's business. There are ways to structure those transactions where it's not just a real estate play, it can also be a play for an operating business.
So real quick, and then we'll move on. The interesting thing about this is, and we were kind of joking about this, if you find the next Microsoft, you find the next Facebook in downtown Garner, you can go invest in that company today.
Yeah.
And then over time, withdraw your money with no tax. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads into here talking through the tax benefits side of this a little bit. I think you really have to break it up into these three different buckets, which we've kind of listed out here. The first being gain deferral, the second being partial forgiveness, and then the third being additional forgiveness. And really the first two relate to that initial deferred gain amount, and the third refers to more kind of the appreciation of your investment into one of these funds and how you have the ability, as Joe just said, to completely eliminate any taxes from that appreciation. So going into a little bit further detail, kind of that first step is gain deferral. You have a capital gain that you've recognized in 2019. Well, any normal circumstances, you would report that gain, you'd recognize it, you'd pay taxes on it, and that would be it. But by taking that gain and investing it into a qualified opportunity fund, which essentially is investing into an opportunity zone, then you have the ability to defer that gain out until the earliest of 2026 or when you sell your investment in the fund. So automatically, if you just do time value money analysis, you're getting a benefit there just from the gain deferral piece. Moving on, you have partial forgiveness of that original gain, and you get this just by holding your investment for an extended period of time. If you've put your investment into an opportunity fund and you've held it for 5 years, automatically off the top, 10% gain elimination. If you put it in for 7 years, that's another 5%. So now just by holding this investment for 7 years, you've taken 15% of your original gain and completely eliminated it. But as Joe said, the 10-year mark, I think this is really what has people excited. And when you get to the 10-year mark, any appreciation on that investment, so you put in $1 million and it appreciates to, no matter what, you have the ability to step up your basis and wipe that gain out. And I think that's what has everybody really excited about this program and what you can do with it. And then I think, it's the accountant on stage. It always helps me to apply numbers to this, and maybe a shock to everybody here. But we put a little example together that I think would just be helpful to kind of illustrate how this will work. So this is dated to 2018, but all the rules still apply. So in this example, individual A had appreciated stock, and they sold it for a $2 million gain. Well, under any normal circumstances, the person's recognizing that $2 million gain, and they're paying taxes on it. But they decide, well, no, I want to go invest into Lee's Opportunity Fund here. So they take their $2 million and invest those proceeds with him. They've got it in there within 180 days. So now, no longer recognizing that gain, no longer paying taxes. So that's kind of that first step that we talked about, really, which is gain deferral. So now we go fast forward, it's 2023. Well, A has held his investment in this fund now for 5 years. So just by holding his investment, you're taking $200,000, 10% of that gain is eliminated. It's gone. Never have to pay taxes on it, completely eliminated. 2 more years, it's 2025. Well, now they've held it for 7 years, that's another 5%. So now just by holding this investment for an extended period of time, such as 7 years, they've taken $300,000 of that gain completely off the table. Will never have to pay taxes on it. So we get to 2026, they haven't sold their investment, and this is that time period we were talking about that's so important because at December 31st, 2026, no matter what, you have to recognize that initial gain. But because we had it in here for 7 years, instead of recognizing $2 million like we would have in 2018, we're only recognizing $1.7 million. So automatically off the bat, you're getting a benefit here of partial forgiveness of that initial gain just by being an investor in one of these zones. And moving on to this slide, I think this is where you really get to see the biggest benefit of this. So now A's held his investment for the 10-year holding period, and he says, all right, I'm ready to get out, I'm ready to liquidate, been in this long enough, I'm gonna go sell it, my investment to Joe for $5 million. Put $2 million in any normal circumstance, right? That's a $3 million gain. That's a big sum of money you're gonna have to recognize and pay taxes on. But because you've held it in this opportunity zone for 10 years, you can step your basis up to the full $5 million and recognize 0% of that gain. So that $3 million is eliminated, it's off the table completely. So now you've taken basically an investment for $5 million and only recognize $1.7 million of gain to pay taxes on. I mean, that's significant amounts of savings. That's significant numbers there. And so I think when people realize really that 10-year hold, this is what everybody started getting really excited about. And you can't go anywhere in 2019 without hearing the word opportunity zone now.
Yeah, and I think if you all remember back to the slide where you saw the 2 green census tracts, right, that are in our town, there's a large swath of Garner that is covered by these zones. And I know this is a very technical and very kind of dry subject, but I wanted to make sure that folks understood the impact that something like this could have. It is a key tool in helping us continue our economic development efforts throughout our community and also helping solve some of the affordability issues that we're seeing in our community all over the county. But the other thing I wanted to hit on too, because this thing doesn't last forever, right? This is the golden goose. It only lives for so long. So I guess, Lee, what are some of the key dates? If folks are interested about this, what are some of the key dates that folks need to know about as they move forward?
Sure. As Thomas mentioned, the year 2026 is significant because under the current tax reform legislation, that's the year during which you recognize the initial gain. And you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out you get additional 5% of gain exclusion after you've held it for 7 years, but you're going to recognize the tax on 12/31/2026. So to get that, you've got to make your investment in 2019. So you make a post-2019 investment, you'll never get that extra 5%. So I have a feeling we're going to be pretty busy between now and December 31st putting opportunity funds together. So that's a key date. But the 5-year mark is a key date regardless of when you invest. The 7-year mark, assuming we get the money into the fund on or before 12/31/2019, and then that 10-year mark when you've held it and then you get the benefit of the gain exclusion. Those are the key dates. Another key date is, so one question we always get is, well, okay, well, 2026, what happens if I sell my investment in 2030? Well, that's fine. There are rules that go out to 2047 that ultimately will get kicked out past then if anybody holds their opportunity zone investment past 2047. But right now you can sell as long as you exit your investment before December 31, 2047. I don't know that many people get into a deal thinking, well, okay, I'm going to hold this till 2050. But the regulations will get changed if they need to, depending on how many people are out there. One other thing to keep in mind is what you've got to do to the property. In the tax world, no tax benefit comes without some burden. And so in the real estate context, the property, and this rule applies, but it's easier to think through in the real estate context for me anyway. The original use of the property in the zone, you've either got to meet what's called the original use, or the original use of the property has to occur in the zone, or you've got to substantially improve the property. And substantially improvement means essentially doubling your basis. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But so on the original use, we've gotten some regulations essentially that say unimproved land. Obviously, the goal here is to spur investment and job creation in these zones. And so land banking, just going around and buying up a bunch of vacant land to hold for investment, that doesn't further the end of the statute. So that doesn't qualify. Any vacant land you hold has to be used in connection with an active trade or business. And we can get into questions about triple net leasing and all that kind of stuff, but that's a whole nother subject for another day. Let's say you buy a building in the opportunity zone. You got an existing building. If the building's been vacant for 5 years and you buy it, then you're deemed to create the original use in the fund under the second tranche of regulations, even though the building may have been there for 150 years. It's just been vacant. If you buy a building that hasn't been vacant, then you've got to rehab it and you've got to double your basis. And so this is where the tax planning comes into play. In a commercial real estate deal, normally you're trying to allocate as much of the purchase, if you're the buyer, you're trying to allocate as much of the purchase price as you can to the building because you want to take depreciation deductions. Here you've got the exact opposite incentive because you've got to spend double your basis in the building in order to qualify, and you get 31 months to do it, so you don't have to do it within 180 days under the 1031 rules. But long story short, there's some tax planning that you need to think through there if you're looking at an opportunity zone investment related to how to allocate the basis between the dirt and the building.
So what you're saying is you should probably have either a tax attorney or a CPA help you if you're interested in this program.
And your financial advisor.
And your financial advisor, maybe a priest or two or something like that, right?
And one quick point, we call these things qualified opportunity zone funds. And that scares people. They're like, oh, well, I got to go to New York and I got to get 75 limited partners in my deal. Yeah. No, you can have your own. It doesn't have to be a fund as we typically think of funds. You can be your own fund, essentially. You can have a captive deal that's just your deal, no outside money.
That's right. So before we take questions from the audience, I guess if someone had capital gains today, maybe somebody in this audience, what are the first steps they should take if they're interested in pursuing this type of program? Either one of you, either from the tax side or from the legal side. So, what is the first thing they should do?
Step one is finding somebody who's setting up one of these qualified opportunity funds. So if you just want to be an investor and you've got gains, that's kind of step one. Step two is on the flip side of that. If you're looking to potentially set up one of these qualified opportunity funds, that's where I think, we've spent a lot of time with folks who are looking at doing this, trying to structure these things accordingly. There's a ton of compliance. If your head's not spinning already, this is what we've been looking at all year. So they're very complicated, and I think if you can structure them correctly on the front end, it'll save you some time on the back end and just really mapping out kind of, your cash flow, your IRR, and what this whole 10-year process is going to look like. So I think step one, if as an investor, is really just finding a fund, vetting it, seeing if it's going to be a good deal. You know, a bad deal has never created tax savings for anybody, so you have to make sure that it's going to be a good deal first off. And then if you're on the other side, then I think really just trying to figure out, you know, how you're going to plan it, how you're going to fund it, who's going to be involved. I mean, really the steps you would take to perform any type of setting up a new business is, you know, talking to Lee about getting all the paperwork and advisory level stuff done, and then talking to us about maybe looking at some of those 10-year models.
Great. Lee, anything to add?
Not really directly there, but one question that always comes up is, well, okay, in the real estate world, I know 1031s. I've been doing 1031s for 30 years. How is this different than a 1031? And that's a good question. It's a whole different animal from a 1031. You still have the 180-day rule, so you have to put as Thomas was saying, you've got to put your money in the fund within 180 days of realizing the capital gain on the front end, but you don't have the 45-day identification period. So you theoretically can blow a 1031 exchange by not identifying any property in the 45 days and move to an opportunity zone strategy and still get the deferral benefit that we're talking about here. Additionally, there's no like-kind requirement. I can go and sell a bunch of securities this afternoon and in 180 days be in a real estate deal. So you don't have to go real estate to real estate, securities to securities. You've got complete flexibility to change there. So those are some points. It's different in other ways. Obviously, the timing and under this structure, you're going to recognize that initial gain or part of it, at least 85% of it, in your tax year 2026. It's different than a 1031. 1031 goals roll it over. But in this deal, unlike the 1031 deal, you've got a potential to exclude any appreciation in value.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that a little bit, I think in a 1031, you know, you're swapping sales proceeds and debt, and in an opportunity zone situation like this, you're really just rolling the gain. So, you know, if you sell it for $5 million and your gain is 3, well, you only have to put the 3 in. Whatever else is cash, you take home. Whereas in a true 1031 exchange, every dollar, every debt component of that transaction has to go towards a new property. So there is a component here where you can sell, actually take some cash in, reinvest, and then take your gain and put it into an opportunity zone. Another thing related to 1031s is, you know, if we were all together in a partnership and did a 1031, we'd all have to do it together. But by doing this opportunity zone, we could push out the gain, say we just want to cash out, pay our taxes, but Lee wants to go get involved. He's not really ready. He wants to reinvest his money. Well, he can now take that gain and put it into an opportunity zone instead of the 3 of us having to come to an agreement. So I really think there's a lot of incentives here for people who maybe have held businesses for an extended period of time or held that investment for an extended period of time and have not been ready to part with it just from a sheer tax liability standpoint. Well, now there's a lot of opportunities to, you know, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and sell out of this business that's been successful for, you know, X number of years and then reinvest those gains into something else. I'm not ready to get out of the market completely and pay all these taxes, so I think it presents a really good opportunity for those folks as well.
Great. Yeah, a lot of flexibility. So we got a few minutes. We can probably take a question or two. Gordon.
So let's say you sell a real estate transaction, you take your gains from that, and the new property, so it's not really built, you got to go through, get permission, got to get all the other stuff. Can you take that gain and put it in a escrow, if you will, and as long as you get the money in before your 180 days, because it might take 2 years to get through events.
The short answer is yes.
Question I didn't get here
Okay,
quickly enough.
gotcha. The question is, so you sell a piece of real estate, and you've got the cash, but you want to construct an apartment project. And if anybody in here can construct an apartment project in 6 months, come talk to me.
Yeah.
So the question was, well, what do you do with the cash? You have to spend all the cash within the 180 days. The short answer to that is no, you don't have to spend the cash. You've got to get it into the fund within the 180 days, and then we've got this working capital rule where you get 31 months to spend the money. And by the way, you may get a little bit more than that if your permitting and entitlement process takes longer. There's not a ton of specificity around this, but the regulations say if you've got a delay that's caused by entitlements, then...
Which will never happen in Garner.
No, of course not.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Only in Raleigh.
Only that's right.
But essentially, you're 31 months. So let's say you got a 9-month delay from what entitlements should have taken. Then you get 31 months plus 9 months. So now you got 40 months to deploy the money. You've got to have a written plan. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You've got to live by the plan, materially comply with the plan. But you get the 31 months to spend it.
So who owns the capital, all that sort of thing?
There's no qualified intermediary here like the 1031 world. You put it in the fund, and if it's your fund, the money's there. Let me bring this to you.
James West, Wake County Commissioner. I've heard a little bit about opportunity zones. Some people, I think, have a real misconception of opportunity zone, and that they are in low-income areas, which you have identified. But my question relates to who truly benefits. It's the investor that gets tax credit or whatever it is. So the people who are living in the low-income zone or the area, how do they benefit? Just by the general improvement? There's not a direct benefit the way I see it, because you just identified that this is a low-income area but already has some challenges.
Sure. Well, I think a few things, Dr. West. One, if you invest in a business and that business is able to grow, they're able to employ more people, the people in that community could then therefore get those jobs. Obviously, this type of investment strategy could also be layered on top of low-income housing tax credits, or even to help offset some costs that maybe generate some naturally occurring affordable housing. And the other thing, especially in the Garner community, is we're seeing that these zones are layered on top of our transit system improvements. So just like what you saw before with bus rapid transit, maybe even one day commuter rail, all these zones are centered around those main corridors that will allow folks who maybe not have the opportunity to either own their own vehicle or choose not to own their own vehicle to be able to access those types of public transportation and get to where they need to go. So I think it's just a layer that is additional on top that can help spur those investments and hopefully drive more affordability into the market, drive more job growth, and drive more investment to help stabilize the tax base and generate new things like Parks and Rec programs like we saw in downtown this morning. All right. I think this probably needs to be the last question.
Are there federal as well as state incentives? Did I get it? Are there federal as well as state incentives for this?
So this is a federal program, and the states kind of have pushed up areas that they targeted to be in the zone. I will say, just from the tax side, like any type of federal regulation, some states are complying, some states are not complying. So I do think it's important when you're looking at these to see, is the state benefit going to be the same as the federal benefit? That's when I think it's important to make sure that, you're talking to a CPA, talking to somebody who can kind of plan around, well, if you're going to have to recognize tax for state purposes and maybe not for federal purposes, well, what does that do from a cash flow standpoint? So I think it's just very important to be proactive, be planning, be monitoring, because this is a long-term play, it's a long-term hold. But that's a very good question.
Yeah, at this point, obviously, North Carolina has not adopted any type of corollary to the Opportunity Zone program, and I haven't heard a lot of conversation. I do some lobbying work. I haven't heard a lot of conversation about that, but it's certainly something that could happen to make the incentive even stronger to get some state-level benefit.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I know this is a very technical and a very dry subject, right? But I hope you can see through this talk that there is a ton of opportunity here in our community and that these zones can play a part of that. If you have additional questions, please feel free to corner one of these guys and ask them, all right? I just know enough to be dangerous and then I have to call them. So thank you again for your time, and let's give these folks a round of applause. Thank you.